And we are enormously fortunate in having Danar Zohar here to speak with us today. I've known Danar for a number of years, and it's wonderful having Danar because she also brings her husband Ian Marshall. And Ian is a psychiatrist, so he's in my field, and also works in quantum mechanics. And so both Danar and Ian make a wonderful pair together. Danar has two children. They are 12 and 14, 13 and 14? 12 and 14. Wonderful age. Good luck, Danar. Danar was born in America and went to MIT. I don't know how many of you have been to Boston, but MIT is on the Charles River. And the Charles always used to freeze over in winter, and you used to see people skating on it, but they put power stations above it, and it seldom does it now. But it still has a lovely spot on the border of the Charles, and there she studied physics. And she tells me that at that time she came to realize that it was the philosophy of physics that she was interested in. And so she then moved up the Charles to Harvard, where she learned about the philosophy of religion. And so I can't think of anybody better qualified to be able to bring together the two aspects of mystics and scientists than is Danar. She has written numerous books. Many of you will have seen or read The Quantum Self and The Quantum Society. And her new book was going to be The Quantum Spirit. But she, in fact, has changed the title of that book to the title of this talk, which is Soul at the Edge. Her current book, which is Who's Afraid of Schrodinger's Cat, is it's a quantum mechanical paradox. Is available outside, and I think it's just been published today, so you can get the first copies. So, Danar, it gives me very great pleasure to welcome you to Mystics and Scientists, and with the knowledge that you bring to this subject, I think it's enormously important that we should hear what you have to say. Danar lectures internationally, and only yesterday was lecturing business people in Copenhagen? Stockholm. And before that, she lectures throughout America and everywhere. So let's welcome Danar.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be here with you. It's a very different kind of audience than I was with yesterday, when I was trying to tell businessmen how to make more money with a new kind of thinking. I'm going to be very personal this morning. Because I want to share a personal quest with you, I shall be honest and open, and therefore perhaps risk offending somebody who differs from me in the way I approach these things. I really apologize in advance, but if I'm going to just share where I'm coming from, then I take that risk, and I really don't mean to tread on any toes. The two main pillars of my own life have been science and religion. I grew up in the American Midwest as a Methodist, living with my grandparents who were pious Methodists, going to church every Sunday, sitting beside them in the pew, singing all the songs about Jesus. I first became passionate about science, I think, at about the age of 7, when I started putting pictures of the solar system on my bedroom wall. And then really became passionate about science at the age of 13, when I discovered quantum mechanics. Slowly, as the years went by, the science undid the religion, and I spent many years on a long quest through the given religions of the world. I tried Roman Catholicism, I tried Unitarianism. At the age of 22, more seriously and in a way that still stays with me, I converted to Judaism. And have reached a point today where I'm trying, I suppose, to work out my own synthesis, and that's what I'll share with you today. So This talk is going to be more personal than intellectual. I'm just going to share a quest with you. The title of my talk, Soul at the Edge, I think is important for you to understand where I'm coming from. By soul, I simply mean that center in each of us that is a quest for meaning and value. That center in each of us that asks questions like, who am I, and why am I here, and where do I come from, what am I meant to be doing, how do I serve, how do I love, what do I love, those kind of questions. So I don't mean something quite so philosophically formal as Rupert was talking about last night. I'm just talking about that center in me. Indeed, for me, this soul is almost inseparable from the heart. And I feel that it's in this heart, the heartfelt nature of our being, that we can make the real synthesis between science and religion today. I have a favorite quote I want to share with you from Archibald MacLeish, who wrote the modern version of Job, the play J.B. He says toward the end of that, after J.B. has suffered all the slings and arrows of God's outrage, he says, blow on the coal of the heart. The candles in the churches are out. The lights have gone out in the sky. Blow on the coal of the heart, and we'll see by and by. That's essentially where I'm coming from. I think that each one of us has within ourselves, within our deepest heartfelt intuitions, the way to form the basis of a spirituality that will work in our times. The other part of my talk, the edge, refers to the times in which we find ourselves. It is, as you probably know, a phrase from chaos theory. In chaos theory, the edge is not like the edge of this podium or the edge of the table. It's not the edge of a cliff that you fall off. It's not dangerous in that sense, but it is testing and trying. In chaos theory, the edge is the point where order meets chaos, where stability meets instability. It's the point where nature self-organizes, where nature creates new information. We living systems, all biological systems, are poised at the edge of chaos. That's what makes us open and adaptive, what makes us so splendidly flexible. It's also what adds a kind of terror to our lives. We're not very determined in any way. We might flip this way or that. We might go into chaos. We might get stuck in order and be boring. I think that today our culture, whether it's accidental or not that it's happening just at the point of a new millennium, but I think our whole culture is poised very much at the edge. I think that those who live today are forced to live at the edge, whether we like it or not. And by living at the edge, I mean that we have to reinvent a tradition, we have to redefine the categories, we have to come up with new concepts, we have to, as it were, start from scratch. That it won't do just to try to paper over the cracks of the conflict between science and religion, to try just to paper over the cracks appearing in the established religions, but that we really have to start all over. And by talking about soul at the edge, I'm talking about starting all over from here. There's another favorite quote I want to share with you that is about being at the edge from my favorite philosopher, Nietzsche. At the someplace in Zarathustra, I don't know whether it's at the beginning or the end, but anyway, someplace in Thus Spake Zarathustra, the book in which he announces that the old God is dead, he says, one must have chaos in one to give birth to a dancing star. I tell you, you do have chaos in you. And as in chaos theory, Nietzsche doesn't mean by chaos something negative. He means something positive. The ability to self-organize, the ability to create, the ability to grow, the ability to reinvent. For Nietzsche, the central image is of a man walking a tightrope. Zarathustra opens, as those of you who've read it will remember, with a tightrope walker coming into the town square. And everybody comes to see his performance. The tightrope walker's job is to walk between the towers of certainty. And in Zarathustra, he doesn't make it. He falls off and he dies. And Zarathustra looks on and says from the sidelines, it's a pity he wasn't ready yet. That's the task of all of us. We're walking that tightrope between the towers of certainty. And the kind of spiritual position I'm trying to outline this morning, which for me comes very much from the science of the 20th century, is about the poise to stay on that tightrope, the poise to walk at the edge between the towers of certainty. And like it or not, as I say, I think that's where we are. In our own family, I've seen my children go through something in the past 8 years that it's taken me 50-odd years to go through. And I think the fact that my children have done it so quickly is not just because they're children growing up in Ian's in my household, but also because this is the journey that youngsters are making today so quickly, recreating in a few brief years of childhood the spiritual journeys of our own lifetimes. I was, as I said, converted to Judaism. My husband Ian is half Jewish but had been raised as a Christian, and when we married we decided we had a kind of mixed ceremony, but we decided when the children were born that it would be easiest for Ian and possible for me to raise them as Christians. So we began with them that way. They were christened in the Church of England. When they were 4 and 6 years old, they came home and said, "Mom, we want to be Jews." I was quite taken aback, and I said, "Well, we're Christians." And they said, "Well, Mom, you became a Jew, so can we." And we tried to handle this the way you do young children at first and said, well, when you're 16 you can do what you want with your religious lives, but we've committed our family to St. Barnabas Church, and we know the priest and we know the congregation, and we'll just be Christians. Well, they said this isn't good enough and went into a sort of they went into a 6-month campaign. When we took them to church on Sunday, they very dramatically sat there like this with their eyes rolling and said, "This is ridiculous. Jews don't go to church." And finally we thought, well, rather than damage them, we'd better perhaps take this seriously. So I went and saw Oxford's Hasidic rabbi and told him the strange story of our family, and fortunately he was very friendly, very nice, very open, and we started going to his Hasidic Shabbat dinners on Friday nights with the children. Before we knew it, they'd enrolled themselves in Hebrew school, which meets on Sunday mornings, and they got themselves out of this burden of going to church. So we settled for a while into the somewhat new experience of being Oxford Hasidic Jews. Not long after, our daughter started studying Japanese at school and became interested in Shinto, and it wasn't long before she was going to be a Shintoist. Then we took them to Thailand, and they visited Buddhist temples, and of course they felt the family should all be Buddhist. They then went through a phase, which is natural to children, of saying, "Mom, which is true?" They noticed that these things conflicted with each other. This put Ian and me in a really sort of uncomfortable and also challenging position, because we aren't the kind of parents who can just say, well, this is true because this is what our family has done for generations, like my mother said to me when I began to ask these questions. We had to search in ourselves. Well, where are the children coming from? Why are they going on this odyssey? We recognized in their odyssey, as I say, our own lifelong odyssey. I think as a family we've settled to a point that I'm going to talk about this morning. It's taken a few years, and it's what the book Soul at the Edge is going to be about. How it is that you can celebrate, value, experience many of the world's religions, and yet feel that your basic loyalty is to something beyond them all, something deeper than any one of them can express. How you can feel commitment in the face of choice. These are some of the spiritual problems, I think, facing us today. When you know so many things are valid, so many things are real, so many paths good to follow, how do you ever choose what to follow? I think that the main spiritual challenge today is twofold: to take on board what science has done to the traditional religions, and to rediscover meaning and value in the absence of dogma, to replace traditional belief in dogmatic systems with some kind of direct experience, with heartfelt experience. I think that the main challenge of science to religion is not that it's said that many of the things that religion teaches us are untrue or impossible, that it's challenged belief in miracles or challenged belief in virgin births or in rising from the dead and things like that. I don't think that's the challenge that science poses to religion. I think that if you heartfeltly believe in those things, you'll go on believing them whatever science says. I think the main challenge of science to traditional religion, certainly for me in my life, has been that science gives us a completely different spirit of inquiry than that which has been offered by our traditional Western religions. Science is about an open seeking of an open truth. Science quest is unended. Science is falsifiable. Science is always ready to find out that it was wrong. Science is a celebration of diversity. Certainly 20th century science is. The spirit of science is, I want to find out. I want to know. And coming out of the tradition of rationalism, humanism, the Enlightenment, the Protestant Reformation, science said, I want to know with what I have in here. I don't want someone to tell me. The spirit of our traditional Western religions has been very much, I will tell you, I will show you, I will guide you, I will protect you. Somewhere in the history of human being and our evolution from the slime, we were released from the bonds of instinct. Animals seem to be guided in their lives by healthy instinct. They therefore know how to live and what to do, and they don't seem as troubled as we are by questions. But something released us from those bonds. In the Bible, this is tied up to the story of eating the apple. But that story of eating the apple is the myth of our freedom from the bonds of instinct. That's what brought us to the edge. I think for 2,000 years we've tried to run away from the edge in our traditional religions by trying to replace the lost certainty of instinct with a certainty of belief. Moses came down from Sinai with several thou shalts and thou shalt nots, the message of the one God, the message to believe him and follow him. Christianity carried on with this, with the message of the one Savior, the one path to salvation, and the promise that we are the little children and he is the shepherd and he will take care of us. So it was basking in a kind of certainty. I think that this is what we find untenable today. Two things. I think most of us, certainly I, find it difficult to believe anything with any really great certainty. For me, the questions have become more important than the answers. And that's very much in the spirit of 20th century science. Good quantum science realizes that the questions you ask largely determine the answers you get. That the way you look at an experiment determines what you're going to see. The emphasis is on the questions, on the uncertainty, and on all the creation that uncertainty makes possible. It's not an emphasis on absolutism, certainty, or belief in anything. Good science is at the edge. Many things in the Western tradition have always been at the edge, but the mainstream religion has rejected them. Both Eastern and Western mysticism have stressed experience over dogmatic belief. Both have stressed the ineffable, that thing which we value, that thing which we hold sacred, which is beyond all ability to describe it. As they say in Taoism, the way that can be expressed in words is not the way. Jewish mysticism holds the view that God has 10 faces and you must know them all because none of them is really the face of God. The face of God is something we can never gaze at. The Western and Eastern mystical traditions have always been about the ineffable, the experienced, and the plural. Our mainstream Western religious tradition has been monotheistic, as we know, and I think that's another thing that I reject. The most beautiful quote of pluralism that ties it to the heart and to the edge that I have found from the Western mystical tradition is a quote from the 11th century Sufi mystic Ibn al-Arabi. He says, "My heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles and a convent for Christian monks, and a temple for idols and the pilgrim's Kaaba and the tables of the Torah and the book of the Quran. I follow the religion of love. Wherever love's camels take me, that is my religion and that is my faith." The heart that I would describe as the quantum heart, the heart inspired by, fired by the passion of 20th century science, the myth of 20th century science, not so much the experiments and the equations, but the mythology, the deep story behind 20th century science. This quantum heart is a still and changing heart. It's a heart that changes around a still point, a heart whose center can be sensed but never quite seen in each form that its circumference takes. It's a heart poised between order and chaos, a heart poised between stillness and change. I want to just go through a little bit. Peter said that Ian and I are writing our third volume of our trilogy now, and so I'm very much involved in what I'm talking to you about this morning. And I thought I would just go through a little bit of what we're writing about in this book, the content of what I mean by soul at the edge. Where have we got to in wedding our passions for science and the myth of science with our passions for spiritual quest? Any spiritual tradition, if it's to be viable, I think has three major aspects, and David referred to some of this last night in his introduction. Religion or spirituality is partly about understanding. It is something that gives us a knowledge of the heart, a knowledge that we can digest partly with the head, some way to think about where we're coming from. Spirituality, though, is also about practice, about somehow being able to embed this in our lives, having rituals, traditions that we can value. And I think spirituality is ultimately, and in its third aspect, about love and service. What do we love? How do we serve that which we love? So we've divided Soul at the Edge into these three aspects: understanding, practice, and love and service. And I'll say just a little bit about each in the short time that we have together this morning. The essence of the book is to say, as I have said to you this morning, that we live at a time when we are at the edge, when we must take the burden of our spirituality onto ourselves. When we give up what I think is the childish notion that someone's going to ride into town on a donkey and save us. If anyone's going to save me, it's going to be myself. But then I have to ask, what is that self? Who am I? Do I just mean my petty ego? Do I mean that I find inside this little puny me that stands before you here my own salvation? So one of the questions is, who am I? What is my condition? What are my challenges? Who is this me in whom I must find my own salvation? These are the things that I deal with in the section of the book on understanding. Those of you who are familiar with the quantum self know that I come from that tradition in science, which is a minority, but by now a respected minority, that believes that there is a quantum mechanical aspect to consciousness. That consciousness, that which makes us human, that which gives us a soul, can't be explained in the same reductive science that computer science describes for us. That there is an element to mind, to soul, that is beyond that Newtonian mechanistic science. At the same time, because I am a child of the science and the scientific myth, and science has played such a role in my life, I can't believe that my soul, my mind, come from somewhere outside the physical world, outside the system that science ultimately, if science were perfect, could describe. I feel myself to be very much part and parcel of all that is in this universe, very much a child of the universe. I know that my body is made of stardust. I believe strongly that my mind follows the same laws as everything else in this universe. If it is the case, as it is still today, that science can't adequately describe consciousness, then that is simply a temporary failure of science, not saying something about consciousness coming from Mars or Venus or outside the system somewhere. So one of the things I look for in this book is to talk about mind and its source. If mind is quantum mechanical, what kind of quantum system is it, and how does it relate to all else that is in this universe? In our book, The Quantum Self, we describe mind, consciousness, as being a quantum system called something like a Bose-Einstein Condensate, which is a big word to those of you who haven't heard it before. And for those of you who have heard it, you'll recognize an old friend. But simply put, a Bose-Einstein Condensate is simply the most ordered and most coherent structure that we know of in the physical universe. It is a quantum structure. You find them in laser beams, in superfluids, in superconductors, in neutron stars. And Ian and I believe, and people like Roger Penrose believe, that you find it in the human brain, and that it is the ground state of our consciousness. The thing that makes this interesting to me in asking the question, who am I? What is my condition? What are my challenges? Is that the ground state of the universe in quantum science is also described as a Bose-Einstein condensate. In the old science, when we ask what was the world consist of, it consists of things, bits and pieces, atoms. In 20th century science, when we ask what does the world consist of, the answer is energy, patterns of dynamic energy. Everything that is, you and I, the seats we're sitting on, this podium, the trees outside, are patterns of dynamic energy. And in this grand myth of the new science, the ground state of all energy, the lowest energy state of which we are all excitations, is known as the quantum vacuum. It's badly named vacuum because in the West, vacuum tends to mean empty, and the quantum vacuum is far from empty. It's full of all the potentiality of all that ever can exist, but it's empty of characteristics. It's empty of qualities, because all characteristics, all qualities are excitations, and the vacuum is unexcited. It's ground, still energy. It's like the pond, and all that exists are ripples on that pond. The quantum vacuum happens to be, as best science knows today, a Bose-Einstein condensate. And therefore, I, my mind, my consciousness, my soul, if it is quantum, if it is based on Bose-Einstein condensation in the brain, am made of the same stuff as the ground of the universe. I become a thought in the mind of God, an excited state in the ground state of existence. That gives me a sense of where I come from, at least, and who I am with respect to my identity. What do I do about it? Why am I here? What are my challenges? The quantum vacuum began as still, unexcited, and as far as modern science can put it, accidentally went through a random perturbation. That's the part I question, whether it was all that random and accidental. But unless you've got consciousness in there, which current science doesn't have, there's no way for anything to be other than a random perturbation. I feel quite strongly that when science develops, and we are only 5 minutes into the history of the universe, and therefore only 5 minutes into the history of science description of the universe, I feel that as science matures, it must be able to incorporate consciousness. And that as consciousness clearly exists, and we're all sitting here being quite conscious, and the quantum vacuum is the foundation of everything that exists in the universe, there must be consciousness in the vacuum. The vacuum itself may even be conscious. But these are at the edges of scientific speculation. Whether it's because of conscious need, conscious intention, or random perturbation, at some point the quantum vacuum became excited. The rest of the story of our creation has been about that unfolding, that change from stillness to complexity, that is the story of our universe. The vacuum throwing out more and more complex excitations. We are among those excitations. We are part of the process of the universe transformation. We are indeed agents or instruments of that transformation. We, like everything else in the universe, are excitations of the quantum vacuum, feelers of the future, paths of exploration that the vacuum is taking in its own journey to who knows where. Therefore, transformation is very much a part of our own personal stories, the need to transform and understanding what transformation is and what it costs. I know I personally have been going through psychotherapy for the last year and a half, and that's transformation right up close, or at least it has been for me. It hurts. It's not easy. It's painful. To really change deeply means to undo what you have been done, to blow up your old self, and to start from scratch. It means to come to the edge. And being at the edge is not comfortable. Being at the edge can be quite scary. I think one of our challenges, therefore, is to go through transformation, to be willing to confront pain, to be willing to look at our suffering and say, what am I learning from it? Not just say dumbly, why am I suffering and will someone protect me from it? But why am I suffering? What can I learn from it? What does it tell me about my place in the overall processes of transformation? I think another thing that we're here for is to notice things. I have a chapter in the book that Ian and I are writing now called Unbecoming Awake. It's the part of the book which is closest to the Buddhist tradition because it's very like the Buddhist vision of mindfulness. I think that most of us, most of the time, sleepwalk through our lives. We don't notice each other. We don't notice the things about us. We don't notice ourselves. Because we are, and everything in our world is, an excitation of the quantum vacuum, we are, and everything in our world is, sacred, holy. Everything is an expression of the source. Surely we must be called upon to notice it, simply to wake up, simply to become more conscious. Coming to the edge requires being more conscious. When we are being creative, when we are thinking consciously as opposed to just sleepwalking, our brains are poised at the edge of chaos. When we are facing life, seeing life, wondering what stand we have to take on life, our souls or our hearts are poised at the edge of chaos. So I think one of the things we are called upon to do is to become awake. The question of death obviously has to be dealt with in any new look at a new spiritual tradition. Death is something our Western tradition hasn't handled very well at all, in my opinion. Every time I see one of these awful black wagons carrying somebody away and people weeping, I think, boy, have we got it wrong. And I hope that someday when I die, I'm carried off in a brightly colored psychedelic van with a jazz band or something happy playing. Because I think that a quantum vision of death, a vision of death that comes out of 20th century science, is something we might celebrate rather than something we might mourn. Everything in this universe is an excitation of dynamic energy. There is in this world, according to science, conservation of energy. Before I am born, before I become an excitation, I'm part of the quantum vacuum, I'm part of the source. When I cease to be an excitation, I can only go back to that source. I return home. Nothing is lost in the vacuum. Once I have returned home, I can do nothing but journey forth again. I'm not so much talking about necessarily Buddhist views of reincarnation. I don't know whether I'll journey forth as a robin or a stone or another human being. But it does seem to me that it's inevitable that that energy which I am will become another pattern of energy at some later point. I'm not lost. I've recently gone through a kind of death experience of my own where I've really felt this in a heartfelt way, where my philosophy became a reality for me. And I almost longed for death, simply because it seemed so beautiful, a return home, a return to the source. Those back to the womb experiences that psychologists like Peter talk about. But I think that in the quantum vision where you unite what quantum physics is saying about who we are and where we come from, what our identity is, with the spiritual quest to understand our finitude, one comes out with a very positive view that death is something beautiful, something to celebrate, something to look forward to. That death is part of life's process and not the end of life's process. So in our practice section of this book, we've talked about coming up with more positive rituals for death, ways to celebrate death, ways to greet it with joy. I want to spend the rest of our time together, though, on what for me is, at the moment, just because of where I am personally, the most powerful part of the book, and that is love and service. What do I love, and how do I serve it? I think the things I love are divided into what I would call the sacred world, the sacred self, and the sacred other. The sacred world is what I have already talked about. It's everything else in this universe that is an excitation of the quantum vacuum. It is the stuff of which I am, the process of which I am a part.
There is no division, as in the mainstream Western tradition, between me and the world, between my soul and the world, between my heart and the world, between my thought processes and the world. Inside my own brain, I carry the brain of the slug and the ant, the duck, the frog, the cat, the dog, etc., and I use them all when I think. But I also carry in my brain even more primitive processes that belong to those of subatomic particles. I carry within my body, as I said, stardust. I am made of the stuff of which this universe is made. How do I make any distinction? How do I say some of it's bad and some of it's good? How do I say that it's there for me to use or manipulate, as our Western tradition, both spiritual and scientific, has taught us? How do I say I'm top dog in a universe that's only 5 minutes into its creation? I suspect few of us in this room can wish that we're the last word creation has to say on evolution. We haven't even begun to get it right yet. So in loving this sacred world, I'm loving all that is. I'm loving all of which I am a part. I'm loving the process of evolution that will carry us forward. I'm loving a world beyond us that we can't even conceive, where evolution is taking us. The sacred self. I said that I must find my own salvation, that I must become the basis of my own spirituality, and that I didn't mean my puny ego self. The self of which I speak is that larger self that Jewish mystics have talked about. I'm sure other Western and Eastern mystics have talked about. I know the Buddhists talk about the large self. In the book, The Quantum Self, it's what Ian and I mean by the quantum self. It's that self that is the origin of all of me. It's the transpersonal self that incorporates everything in the universe. It's the roots from which I come. I am but the leaves on a tree, and the roots are deep down into the fundament of reality. So the sacred self, the me that will find my salvation, is not this puny ego me standing here filled with pettiness and pain, regret and expectation. The sacred self is my larger quantum self, that part of me that is at one with everything, that part of me that can draw from all of you and from everything else in the universe. And that brings me to the sacred other. We have, in our Western tradition, made such a distinction with our dualisms between spirit and matter, between soul and body, between self and other. Since the atomistic philosophy of Newton got taken up by Freud in his psychology, our Western psychology has been particularly obsessed with the notion of the other. Freud's psychology of object relations said, I am an object to you, you are an object to me, we can only meet each other in a clashing, bashing way, our boundaries meeting but never being able to connect or get inside each other. The things I don't like, I project onto the other. I put my first loyalty. I remember when I was a child, my mother used to say, charity begins at home, by which she meant, don't go around being a bleeding heart for all these other people. Take care of us first. That's very much a Western narcissistic attitude. In the quantum view of reality, in the quantum view of the self, where I realize that I am an excitation of the quantum vacuum, quantum science also tells us that all excitations of the vacuum are interwoven with each other. Quantum holism says there is no separateness in this universe. Everything is part of and defined through everything else. In this world, there are no others. Freud said that the commandment to love thy neighbor as thyself was the most impossible commandment ever written, because how can you ever love another object as yourself? In the quantum view, love is not only desirable, it's almost impossible. How can I not love my neighbor? Because my neighbor is myself. I'm not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. You are extensions of me, and I am an extension of you. The last thing I want to talk about, because Peter's asked me to leave some time for questions, is what for me in the most recent years has become the largest question of all. If there is a sacred world, a sacred self, and a sacred other, if everything is so holy, so wonderful, where does evil come from? What is evil? Why do we suffer? I think that in transformation, in spirituality, in dealing with our own identity, in dealing with the identity of the other. Perhaps the most pressing spiritual challenge for us, in the Western tradition at least, is to come to terms with what Jung called the shadow, the dark side of human nature, the ugly side, the rejected side, those aspects of myself that I can't face, so I project onto the other. And then I call them evil. I project them onto the devil if I am a Christian. I project them onto the tempter. It's not me that did that, it's something bad within me. As though I can split off something bad within me from me. As though I can split off some evil deed from myself and say he did it or you did it. It's this shadow, I think, that Hitler was trying to kill when he tried to kill the Jews. The Jews have in a way been the shadow of the Western tradition. The Western tradition has projected onto the Jew, the outsider, any quality that we don't want to accept, including the quality that we would all like to kill the Christ within us. The shadow seems to me to be a clue to evil. I don't really know where evil comes from. I think, as best as I can see, evil arises from such twisted pain that we become insensitive and we can't, therefore, respond to the harm and suffering that we cause others. But I'm more interested really in how we deal with evil, how we confront it, how we might come to love that which contains it. I had a very powerful experience about 1.5 years ago. I went to a maximum security prison in Cambridgeshire, Whitemoor Prison, to do a story for The Guardian on dialogue groups. And I was to spend the day with 2 groups of prisoners. The first group were ordinary, respectable murderers, people who had killed in the line of duty, as they put it. They were robbing banks or carrying out insurance frauds, robbing post offices. Someone had accidentally got in the way and they had killed them. But they said, we would never kill intentionally, we would never kill just for our own purposes. So they had a kind of self-respect. I quite liked these guys. They were lovable rogues, many of them, quite intelligent. The way they talked about society reminded me of a group of artists sitting around a student cafe. But then the second group I was to spend the afternoon with were quite different. They were the sex offenders. The first group didn't even want me to go to them. They said, they're scum. We have nothing to do with them. You should have nothing to do with them. When I walked into the room of 40 sex offenders, I was inclined to believe that that's what they were, a bunch of scum. They looked like all my projections of such people. They seemed to me to have distorted physical features. They seemed to me to be of very low intelligence. They seemed to me to be creeps. I got a blinding headache, and I thought, how can I possibly spend 2 hours in the room with these people, particularly as I was the only woman and there were only 2 warders in the room. It just gave me a very queasy feeling, but I stuck it out. During the course of the 2 hours, things changed very dramatically. It was a dialogue group, and dialogue is a powerful medium through which people can bring to the surface things that are very deeply embedded, things you couldn't normally reach for and grasp. In the course of this dialogue, these men who only had 4-letter words, so it was with a very crippled vocabulary they said it, but they managed to convey, yes, we are scum, and yes, we've done terrible things. But we're not only scum, we're also human beings. And in the course of this 2 hours, in reaching out particularly to me, because I was a woman, I think, and most of their crimes had been against women of one form or another, something of a humanity underneath their crimes came out. Something that I could honestly, at the end of the session, embrace. They needed me to embrace them. I would not have thought at the beginning I could, but at the end I could. These scum, these creeps, these most rejected aspects of society, they too are aspects of ourselves. They too are aspects of me. And if we're honest with ourselves, we'll recognize those potentialities within ourselves. I think each of us could be the Nazi torturer. And to deny that is to deny something about the pain harboring within us. I have a favorite poem about this, which I'm going to finish with before we go to questions. It's a poem by the Vietnamese Buddhist poet Thich Nhat Hanh. I quoted it in the Quantum Society, so those of you who have read the book have already heard it, and I beg your pardon. Thich Nhat Hanh is talking about this business that I am the shadow, I own the shadow, that all these things I reject are really part of me. And he's talking about the problem of seeing that there is so much suffering in the world, and yet I am the one who could cause that suffering. He says in his poem, I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond, and I'm also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant, selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl refugee on a small boat who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. And he finishes by saying, please call me by my true names. Call me by my true names so I can hear all my cries and all my laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and my pain are one. Please call me by my true names so I can wake up, so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. I feel, for me at least, the poem sums up a lot of the key to spirituality in our times at the edge and where we might get if we combine it with the myth of 20th century science. Okay, I quit.
Now, Warren Benton's Jewish name is Zev ben Shimon Halevi. So, and that is what appears on his books. So it's not a pseudonym, it is his Hebrew name. Zev means wolf. So his name is Wolf, the son of Simon the Levite. He is an heir to an authentic and ancient teaching. Kabbalah is a disciplined method of working, of understanding the nature of the universe and our place in it. The brilliance of Warren's work has been to bring Kabbalah up to date, so that it to take away its conventional accretions that it gathered over the centuries and make it a practical tool that can be understood and used by modern men and women. Now, it's a pleasure and a privilege to sit at the feet, of an authentic teacher, at the feet even. And that is now what I'm going to invite you to do. Seems to be a morning for Jewish mysticism, at least until coffee break. It's interesting that all Jewish Orthodox kids, the first thing they learn, the first sentence of a prayer that they learn, is a prayer for unity. And the first sentence is Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, which is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. So, I'll give you Warren Kenton.
I would like to start with a Kabbalistic invocation. So, can you make yourselves receptive, which is what the word Kabbalah means, to be receptive. Let us gather together. Let us draw together. Let us form a vessel to catch the dew of heaven. Let us rise up, go to that holy place of meeting, gather there with the companions of the light. Let the veil of heaven be drawn back. Hear this. Malkut Yesod, Hod Netzach, Tiferet, Kavura Hesed, Binah Chochmah Ketah. Lord, Thou art the living Almighty. Thou art Yahweh Elohim, the Holy One. Thou art, I am. If it be Thy will, let Thy Holy Spirit descend upon us this day, that we may know Thy presence. Amen. It's said that you're born either a Platonist or an Aristotelian. That is to say, you either come from the way of revelation or the way of reason. Plato was concerned with ideas and concepts, Aristotle with evidence, and in a way that was the epitome of science and mysticism. And Kabbalah, which is a very ancient tradition, which has been developing over the various centuries and millennia, is really a combination of these two approaches. That is, the ordinary everyday world and the world which lies beyond. To join these two, to make them comprehensible, make them intelligible, is really what Kabbalah is about. And here one has to differentiate between two kinds of Kabbalah. There's a kind of Kabbalah that is very superstitious, which is partly concerned with magic, and after 4,000 years that's inevitable. The same thing happened to Neoplatonism. It started to become theurgic rather than philosophical. And the other one is the core of the essence of its ideas and its concepts. Now, right at the beginning, before existence, according to the ancient Kabbalists, there was no existence. Nothing existed. In fact, the term used in the Middle Ages was ayin, nothingness, no thingness. And then there was Ein Sof, which means without end, the infinite. And these were two terms, not names. They were terms for the absolute, that which lies beyond existence. And as my learned friend here said, that the Holy One was so filled with love that the Holy One wished to express love and receive love. And the other combination of that is that God wished to behold God. The Holy One wished to see itself, the absolute, to regard its own reflection. In order to reflect, one must have a mirror. And existence is the speculum in which I am beholds I am. And this is, as Moses was on Mount Sinai, this was the name that was given. Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. I am that I am. And we will see this theme running right through the whole of Kabbalah, and indeed people have already spoken about this in its various forms, is that the little self and the great self are in fact the same thing. That we are extensions of the Holy One. Each of us is a nerve ending of the Holy One, of the absolute beholding itself. Now, how did this speculum, this mirror, come into being? Well, there are various Kabbalistic views, but one of them, because as many Kabbalists said, this is only an analog, it's only a myth to try and explain the unexplainable, and as all mystics have said, how do you explain the unexplainable? You can't, you can only do it through analogy. The way they put it metaphysically was, first there was ayin, nothingness, absolute nothingness. In the midst of that absolute nothingness, there appeared, through the will of the absolute, a dot, a somethingness. And that dot was a void, a vacuum. And into that dot was poured what were called the 10 divine processes, principles, names, crowns, hands, many, many names of these principles. And this is where we'll start our picture show of this secondary phase. So can we have the lights off and the thing on? Ayin, nothingness, absolute nothingness. Ein Sof, that which is without end. And the fire round the edge is called Ein Sof, or the light or the radiance. And this is very interesting from the point of view of physics, that here is the first stage of light or emanation or radiation, call it what you will. That expresses the will of God. And into this vacuum came these 10 potencies. They're called the 10 Sefirot, which simply means the 10 numbers. And they have many names, but they've been given a certain classical form. And we'll see these at various times, and though they may not be intelligible, just take them as simple names to identify certain principles. So you have these 10 here. The crown, wisdom and understanding, mercy and judgment, beauty, eternity, reverberation, that's a modern translation, the foundation and the kingdom. So here we have the beginning, the embryo of existence appearing in the midst of nothing through an act of will, an act of emanation. Next slide. The first image is said to be humanoid, and it was called Adam Kadmon, the primordial human being. And this, if you like, is a sketch outline of the very first divine Adam. And it's made up of 4 Hebrew letters, which to Christians would be known as Yehovah. In Hebrew, Yahweh, nobody actually knows what the pronunciation is. The Yod, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. And this was not just a name that was given a special connotation, but it also defined the broad outlines of existence. And here we have a central column of equilibrium, a masculine side, an active side, the yang side, and a feminine side, a passive side, the yin side, if you like. That's the side of structure, that's the side of dynamic, and the central axis is the axis of consciousness. And the 4 letters define 4 worlds: emanation, creation, formation, and action. We know them more familiarly at our level as fire, air, water, and earth, in other words, the 4 states of matter. But at this point, at the point of Adam Kadmon, which is, as I said, simply a sketch outline, this is the seed of existence. This is the potentiality. This is the world of the eternal unchanging. Next one. This is what is known as the Semiotic Tree, the various Sefirot here on their pillars, and the various 22 parts, the various connections. Now, it's not simply, as we shall see, a rigid diagram. There are all sorts of flows and connections. There are triads below. There's what's called the lower face and the upper face. This, in fact, is the key diagram in Kabbalah. It's the, if you like, the model upon which everything exists. This is the divine paradigm upon which the lower worlds emerge, unfold, and manifest from unity to differentiation. Next one. For example, we have here the 2 pillars on the upper and lower faces. And we have here the octave, do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, interval, do, these being intervals, this being the core of the thing itself. We can see here arrows which are what is known as the lightning flash. That's a process by which it unfolds, and then the secondary parts are the various connections. Those of you who are familiar with metaphysics, if you like, they're major and minor chords there. Next one. Here, for example, is an event starting here, and the impulse can flow in many directions and flow around many triads. And of course, depending which particular Sephirot it starts with, which direction it flows into and out of, there are many possible combinations. In other words, while this appears to be quite a rigid diagram, it's not called the Etz Chaim, the tree of life, for nothing. It is a living thing, a basis, a skeleton. Next one. Where does it come from? Well, in the book of Exodus, Moses goes up to the top of Mount Sinai, and he's given the specifications for the tabernacle. And one of them is the menorah, the 7-branch candlestick. And as you can see here, these are the Sephirot, the crown, wisdom and understanding, mercy and judgment, eternity and reverberation, sometimes called glory, the place of knowledge, the place of beauty, the foundation in the kingdom. And we have a right side, the yang side, the yin side, structure, dynamic, equilibrium down the center. We also have 4 worlds: the divine world of emanation, the world of creation, the world of formation, and down here is the world of action, the 4 worlds, each with their masculine and feminine sides, their dynamic and their structural sides there. There is the original tree of life. It emerged somewhere in Spain, southern France, in the Middle Ages, and it came into the public domain. Prior to that, it was kept extremely discreetly onto one side. Next one. I'm sorry the intensity is not great, but can we take this light out? That might be. We have here the primordial word, and these are related to the names of God. Here is I am that I am. The very first name that the Holy One gives to Moses. Then we have here Yahweh, and here Elohim. These can be translated I am, I will be, and I will be many, Elohim being plural. And then we get the various sub-names which are used in the Bible. El, God the merciful, Yah, God the just. And here we have a combination of Yahweh Elohim, which in the English Bible is translated as the Lord God, but it means actually the Creator. In other words, when the Holy One puts on the hat of the artist. Here we have Yahweh, the hosts of Yahweh, that is the hands of Yahweh, and Elohim Tzaboth, the hands of Elohim, if you like, the inside and the yang side of God in action, because this represents, for example, in Adam Kadmon, the intellect of the divine man or human, the heart of the divine human, and the action of the divine human. Here we have El Chai Shaddai, the living Almighty, and here we have Adonai, which means my Lord. And this is the primordial world with its various dynamics. And out of this word of unchanging, this word of potentiality, emerges where the book of Genesis starts with the Creator and the first day of creation here. That is day and night. And then this one here, the separation of the firmaments between the upper worlds and the lower worlds. And here we have the appearance of dry land and water and plants. In other words, we have here fire, air, and then water and earth. The principles in the world of creation, this is Plato's world of ideas, the principles or essences or spirits of the 4 elements which form the basis of existence at every level, including the physical. And plants which represent the principle of life, the primordial principle of life upon which all life is based, organic life as we know it is based. Here, coming down, we come to the celestial lights, that is the various elements and life under the celestial rhythms. That also includes the atomic, molecular, chemical, and so forth, all the rhythms, all the cosmic rhythms. Then we have here the fish and the fowl of the air. In Kabbalah, the fowl of the air are the archangelic beings, the great spirits, and the fish, representing the watery world, are the angelic worlds, as against the archangelic. More about that in a moment. And here on the 6th day, we have the beasts of the field. So you have of the air, of water, and of earth, and the second Adam. Most people think that Genesis is the first Adam. It's the second Adam. It is the spiritual Adam, the cosmic Adam. That is quite separate from the divine Adam. So you have a divine world, a spiritual and cosmic world here, and here on the 7th day is Shabbat, the day of rest. So you have here the 7 days of creation based on the paradigm of that primordial world here. As you can see, what is called the lower face of the divine world interpenetrates with the upper world, upper face of the spiritual world. And this is a very important factor in Kabbalah, but more of that in a moment. Next one. I can only give you a taste of this. I can't give you any more than that, but maybe if you look in the books, you'll get a sort of much deeper comprehension. This is the two central words. This is the word of the spirit, and this is the word of the soul. That is, this is the word of air, and this is the word of water. These are the angelics and their various names. You've got Great Michael here, Gabriel here, Raphael here, Uriel there, all the traditional archangels. And down here you have all the various angelic hosts, not archangelic hosts, the lesser angels. And you have here, touching on the theme of evil, what are called the archdemons of force, demons of force, archdemons of form, demons of form. They represent what are called the clifot, that is the bark or the outer part of existence, the edge, the very edge that you spoke of, where in this side it is excessive activity. That constitutes chaos and evil. On this side, this is excessive inactivity, excessive rigidity. Now, there are three orders of evil according to Kabbalah. The two pillars, excess in each case, and down the center is what is called conscious evil. And this is the role played by the archetype of Lucifer, who is the tempter, who is the archangel who was displaced because he would not agree to the idea of Adam being superior, who was envious, who turns up in the Garden of Eden. He is the angelic principle of conscious evil who opposes our development, which is why he is called Satan, which means the tester. We sometimes call him the quality control officer. You're not permitted to go through until you've been really pulled to find that you're worthy. And in the book of Job, this is where Satan, who is called one of the B'nai Elohim, one of the sons of God, actually is talking to God and says, well, of course Job's doing very well. I mean, after all, he's got sons, daughters, property. Who wouldn't be? I mean, why don't you push him a bit? And that's when the Holy One says, test him. You cannot destroy Job, but you can test him right to the core. And that is what we would call the opposition, conscious evil, as against mechanical evil on each side there. Next one. There's the Garden of Eden. That's a 15th century engraving. And this is at the level of the soul as against the spirit. And it's said that when human beings come from Adam Kadmon, each of us is considered to be a cell or a photon of Adam Kadmon, the primordial divine human being. We come down into the world of spirit as male and female. But then when we pass from the world of spirit into the world of the soul, which is sometimes called the treasure house of souls, we differentiate into soul mates. So the soul always has a male and female. They're always together, which is why many people are always continually looking for their soulmate. But of course one doesn't meet one's soulmate until you're ready to rejoin in the return, in the teshuvah, to do one's work, to execute one's destiny. Meanwhile, we have to come down and undergo many lives, many experiences, in order to learn what to do and what not to do. And at the right time, we meet our soulmate, we work with our soulmate, and we come back with our soul group, which will eventually return to Adam Kadmon, to that particular part of the Adam divine organism where we complete our work. But that's a very long story. We have here in the center of the garden the tree of knowledge, and a second tree, which is the tree of life. And here you are, there's the divine world, there's the spiritual world, the world of Plato's ideas, and here's the world of forms. 8 ideas. For example, you have the idea of a deer or a monkey, and the form of a monkey. And paradise being the world of forms, where all the perfect forms, again, what was being spoken of yesterday, as the actual configuration, the field force, the morphic field, call it what you like, the actual form, which as we see every spring, the flowers come up and they wither and die. Where is that form held? Well, it's held in that world of formation, that universe of formation. There are 4 universes, 4 worlds. And they appear on the earth and disappear on the earth, but they do not disappear in the world of forms, in paradise, or in the world of ideas, the idea of a monkey. Next one. Here, of course, is the lowest of the 4 worlds. We have here the 4 elements, and we have also organic life. Minerals, inorganic plants, animals, humans, and the human history and evolution working itself out right at the bottom of this great tree. The bottom of the tree, which is where we are, is where it's the most interesting work. This is, if you like, the grinding part. This is the part in the studio, in the laboratory, where things are worked out. And quite a few of us have come down here because it's far more interesting down here than it is up there. This is where, in fact, the action is. And in fact, it's called the world of Asiya, the world of action. That's the physical world. Next one. There's your four worlds. The world of emanation, the world of creation, world of ideas, the world of formation, world of the soul, and the world of action, the physical world. And you can see running right down the center, there are 11 great circles, plus one. That's the veil before the face of the Holy One. And that great tree, if you like, is the unifying field of the totality of existence, of those four worlds, which some traditions would call that carnal, astral, mental, and causal. This world is the world of the Holy One's will. Now, for example, to explain that process, I want to build a house. That's my first level. Then I have an idea of what kind of house. Is it to be a palace or a cottage? And then I sit down, I write down on my pad the kind of design I want. It can reach that point and simply remain a form and never be built. It's not until the bricks and mortar are actually put down. So you've got here the will, the world of ideas, the world of forms or designs, and then the actual physical manifestation, locked together in a completely integrated system. And this is the system of descent and ascent and of return here. So you've got here physical, psychological, spiritual, and divine there. Next one. There they are together, and they're quite familiar, look quite familiar as far as the DNA molecule system is. Maybe this, being the classical paradigm, is where, as somebody said, the fabric of existence, at its most essence, comes from these various levels, this great chain of being. Next one. Here, for example, right at the bottom, we have the mineral world, the vegetable, and the animal kingdom. Here's the earth, the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So within this particular world is the planetary system. Not the planets you see through a telescope, but the angelic beings, which is what they are. The sun being classified as an archangelic being here, because that, in fact, is at the base of this great tree here. So at the center of these angels, or gods, as the ancients used to call it, was an archangel, the sun. Here are different kinds of time. This is the passing moment now. Here is a lifetime of a person, the lifetime of a planet, and here you have up here cosmic time, and then divine time, which is the eternal now. The eternal now containing the passing show, whether it's organic, inorganic, planetary, galactic, angelic, archangelic. It contains them all. And it runs right down the center, that divine, eternal now. Next one. There's an early 17th century engraving by Robert Flood, Rosicrucian, studied Kabbalah. There's the Absolute. The outer circle is the divine world, world of creation or ideas, world of formation, forms. And then here, where the fixed stars are, is the beginning of physical reality. And then, according to their understanding, this is the solar system, where the planets and the sun and the moon, and then the fire and the earth, animals, vegetables, minerals, and then water and earth itself. All contained within this speculum. It's actually called a speculum here. Here, if you like, is the whole of existence. If we could understand and comprehend these principles in detail, many things which seem paradoxical will suddenly fall into place. And paradox usually comes when there are two levels or two realities juxtaposed. But if you see the two realities, suddenly go, aha. Next one. Another Robert Flood diagram. Here's the physical body, and there's the psychological body based on the tree, circles of the tree, the spiritual body, and then the divine. You can see the tree there. So these were the interior universe. There's an exterior universe composed of 4 worlds and 4 realities, and there's an interior world, physical, psychological, spiritual, and divine. Depending on what level of development you are, or during the process of a meditation, depending what level you will experience. Either your physical body, what your psychological strengths and weaknesses are, suddenly that cosmic feeling, that transpersonal feeling, and then I am. When you realize that you are beholding yourself, that God is beholding God. In that speculum of you, that microcosmic speculum of you, I am that. I am that I am. And that's one of the great meditations of Kabbalah. If one understood what it was to keep saying, I am that I am, I am that I am, we would become self-realized. Next one. Here's the psyche in detail. We have here the physical body, the ordinary ego mind. Here the capacity to act, to think, to feel. And here are the 2 psychological and biological aspects, active and passive. Here are feelings, as against action and thought. Here is what we call awakening consciousness. And here is the self, as against the ego, that inner self, that true sense of I, that essence of oneself. Here are the 2 sephirot of emotion, expansion and contraction, or judgment and mercy. And this composes the soul. The soul is to do with self-consciousness, conscience, and these are where the emotional decisions, the emotional crisis, the emotional pains occur, which down here are generally pushed to one side. This will occur in dreams, or in a moment of self-consciousness, one is aware of what is needed here in the soul. Here, in this great triangle, is the spirit, understanding or reason, and here is wisdom or revelation coming here. And here is the dark veil of mystical knowledge, making contact with that uttermost triad, the divine triad. So you have the divine triad of the psyche, the intellect here, the spiritual or transpersonal, the psychological or pure soul, and down here the lower parts which are concerned with the biological and psychological. And here are the emotional memories of pleasure and pain, and here are the various places where we store what we would call our collective experience. Now, for example, that circle is concerned with ego consciousness, everyday personal consciousness. This circle is concerned with the self-consciousness, or the individual unconscious, and here is the collective. So we see here Kabbalah setting out in contemporary Jungian and psychological and Freudian terms. They're not incompatible, they're quite compatible when you put them into this integrated system. My book, Adam and the Kabbalistic Tree in Kabbalah Psychology, would show you this in detail, and this afternoon we'll be doing a workshop on Kabbalistic psychology. Next one. Now here's an interesting one for scientists. Gestation. Well, conception takes place here. Life force, the DNA, the pattern, whether a crocodile or a human being, cell multiplication, cell differentiation, the build-up of the core of the being, the various circulations in place, the various monitoring systems in the place, down here the autonomic nervous system, and then eventually gestation. So in other words, even the unfolding of embryology follows this basic divine plan, coming down what is called the lightning flash there. Next one. Here's the body, the sense organs looking outwards, the autonomic system, the central nervous system, the muscles, the nerves, the organs. Here, across this threshold, tissue. Here is the chemistry, the enzymes and so on. Here are the electronics, these concerned with primarily energy, dynamic, these concerned with structure. And here you have the metabolism at the level of the soul within the body, same model. Here, if you like, is the electromagnetic field, or some people might call it the aura. And at this top level is consciousness of whatever organism. This would apply to any advanced organism, including human beings, vertebrates. Certainly any vertebrate that would apply. So one could, for example, look at the interaction of different levels with each other, crosswise, and one can see how the central nervous system coordinates both the lower part and the higher part of the organism. And of course that upper part, as we shall see, integrates with the lower part of the psyche. Next one. I'm having to go quickly just to give a feeling, There's the body and the psyche together. Here is the body, and there's the psyche integrated into it. So you have here the ego relating to the lowest part of the psyche, but the upper part of the body, and the self here, at the crown of the physical world. And here we have all the various psychological processes, which in the course of disorder or stress, the psychosomatic processes, for example, on the side of pain and constriction will generate things like arthritis, or if you've got excessive burnout psychologically, you get burnout here on this side as well. And so your diseases would arise from what particular sephira, what particular triad is resonating or resonating levels down here. And a number of people actually use this as a diagnostic tool. Next one. This is what happens at death. There's the psychological organism, and the physical organism falls off, and the silver cord, as mentioned in the Bible, is broken. All that happens is the lowest tree, the lowest level of reality, called the tzilim, or the image, the shadow of the psyche, falls off and returns, of course, to its various elemental stages. Next one. For those of you who are mechanics, the same principles apply. This is a car. There's the material of the car. There's the styling of the car. There are the cycles of systems, the various things you monitor it with. That's the driver in the seat of consciousness. There's power. There are the controls. There's the design of the vehicle. There's the particular concept of the vehicle, i.e. is it a diesel, a jet engine? And there's the god of the vehicle, the objective of the machine, that is to get us from one place to another, and that's knowledge of driving. And that's quite feasible. You can see all machines, as well as organisms, must follow the interaction of the various pillars and consciousness and their various systems working through. Next one. This is a civilization. Down here we have the land, the people, and the government, whatever form it is, a dictatorship, presidency. Here in the people we have skills. Here we have places, for example, relating to trade. I'll just get the battery's just wearing out. Get a more traditional instrument called a yad, which is a pointer. Trade, here, industry, popular culture, that is at the basic level of the village and the town, and then the beginning of cities, the rise of the middle class. Here we have, as I said, the government. You always have your conservatives, you always have your radicals. They're the soul of that particular community. In this case it's a nation. The radical leaders, the conservative leaders. Here at the top, religion, right up there, the philosophy of that particular civilization, laws, beliefs. Down here, prophets. Down here, sages. And in the center, the mystical tradition which generates that particular civilization, be it Babylon or Egypt or Israel or Christendom. You have to have those mystics there. And at the top, the teaching. In the top triad, the Torah. It doesn't matter if it comes in the form of Taoism or Christianity or Red Indian shamanism. The teaching is the teaching. I showed this diagram, for example, to a Red Indian shaman, and he said, yes, we have this also. We have this also. It's quite recognizable. So one can look at a civilization from the point of view of the tree. Next one. This is faint, but I'll explain it. It's the Royal Society, which was founded, as you know, or may not know, by what was called the Invisible College. And that was a group of esoteric people who met both in Oxford and in London. Here you have the members, place of meeting, the practice and theory, the sciences, industry, the arts, experiment, discussion, the actual meeting, the observations, the pros and the cons, the president of the society, the inner council, right at the top, the guiding spirit. Here is tolerance, discernment, and so on. In other words, an organism, whether it be a human being or a civilization or a society, still follows the same paradigm, the same divine laws. Next one. One needs to penetrate from the obvious, from what is perceived by the senses, into those higher realms. And that basically is what mysticism is about. It's basically what Kabbalah is about. Next one. We hear from the poets like Dante of these higher levels and how one can attain those higher levels, and incidentally how to sink into the lower levels. Different levels of being, different parts of what we call Jacob's ladder. So it often comes through inspiration, through the prophet, through revelation, rather than reason. Reason taking its time, working from the bottom up, revelation being the flash that's coming down. Next one. We have, for example, somewhere around 600 before the Common Era, of Ezekiel in the physical world, seeing the chariot and the throne and the man. These are simply symbols. He lives in the physical world. The chariot represents the realm of form or paradise. The throne of heaven is the spirit. And at the top is the divine man, the fiery man, the radiant man of Adam Kadmon. And the old rabbis would study this for centuries, trying to understand what in fact Ezekiel saw. But here basically is the doctrine of the four realities, the four worlds. Next one. An esoteric school based on the same principle, the place where they meet, the students and the teacher. The rituals they perform, the studies they work through, the prayers. In other words, the way of devotion, the way of action, and the way of contemplation. You'll find this in all traditions. Those three ways are followed. The theory of that particular tradition, the practices of that particular tradition. Then you have the actual meetings and the initiations themselves under the teacher. And here you have what's called the school, which represents the soul, where you have discipline and love and freedom. And up there you have reason. That can be also the scriptures, which are examined. And here you have revelation, experience. And then you have direct experience through the inner teacher, through the tradition, it can be Kabbalah or Zen, into the teaching and beyond to the source of all. So in other words, an esoteric school is also based on this paradigm, this divine paradigm. For more details of that, look at the School of the Soul. Next one. These are various levels of perception. Physical awareness, ordinary everyday acuity, just seeing somebody nicking something in the supermarket, for example. Then there's sensitivity at the level here of feelings. Rupert was talking about this last night, this kind of psychic sensitivity. Then there's lucidity from actually being watchful. And then at the level of the soul, clarity, real clarity, psychological clarity. And here, in this great triad of the transpersonal spirit, vision. And right at the top, illumination. So these are the various levels of penetration depending how you ascend the tree, how you perceive different realities. And of course, a complete person is capable of using all those faculties. Next one. different levels of fate. Here, where people live primarily in the ego, they're influenced by external events, wars, economic crises, plagues, and so forth. They're just crowds, like shoals of fish going to and fro. There's no individuation. They're still as yet unawakened. Then you get this level of what we call the animal person as against the vegetable person, where they have a degree of will, a degree of passion, they have ambitions, but they're basically compulsive. And then you have what is called, at the level of the soul, internally influenced fate. Now the Greeks used to call this the common person who did everything everybody else did, the uncommon person who was unusual, and the hero or heroine. That is, those people who knew exactly what they had to do with their life. And right at the top you have the Zarathustra's, Buddha's, Jesus, Moses. These are people of destiny. So you have here different levels of fate and destiny according to the particular level that you're at. And what a Kabbalist would do would draw this diagram up, and put it on the wall, kitchen wall, and contemplate it for 6 or 7 months, or weeks, or days. And just by knowing this paradigm, you ask questions and it answers back, it reflects back. Next one. This is the struggle, not just between Jacob and the angel, it's basically between one's higher and one's lower self. It depends which one wins. It so happens that Jacob did sustain and was transformed into Yisrael, he who struggles with and for God. And this, of course, is one of the problems that all of us have, being what we are, as at this point undeveloped beings. But that struggle continues every day. Next one. Here are what's called the 7 lower halls of the 7 psychological states, and here are the 7 upper halls of the 7 spiritual states. I won't go into the details there, I just want to show you the general outline. Next one. And here, for example, are the 7 upper halls of spirit, the different heavens. There are 7 heavens. That's the first heaven, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the 7th there. And the 7th, as you can see, it's called in the presence. It's right close to the top. These are the various traditional Hebrew names here. But one could tell from mystics, on their accounts, they would, by the quality, they would give you some idea of what particular level they were. St. Paul, for example, said, I knew a man who was taken up into the 3rd heaven. Now, the interesting thing is, in Hebrew, that's called Malkut HaShamayim, which in English means the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus certainly knew his Kabbalah. I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever. He actually uses the terms. Next one. As one goes higher and higher, one begins to see the grand design, the descent of human souls and the ascent of human souls, through life and death, through many lives, through civilizations, through the unfolding of human evolution. One sees a scale which, walking down the high street, you never are usually aware of. But there it is, flowing right through you, through life and death, life and death, life and death. And that's the transpersonal, the spiritual view. Next one. One might encounter angelic beings, or in this case, an archangelic being. These are beings, if you like, who are the watchers of the universe. They are the beings, if you like, which are incorporated into the Milky Way, or a great storm. The rabbis called them by various names, and it said that on their foreheads was written their task, rain, and then always after the word El, Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, the word El being God. In other words, they were permitted to do certain things, but they were always under the direct will of God. We as human beings have free will, God help us. So we can choose good or evil. Next one. Please God, one rises to that point, which is spoken of by all the mystics, where one is on the same level as the archangelic beings, saying, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 looking in from the world of the spirit into the divine world of Adam Kadmon. This is the process of self-realization, making real the self. Next one. And here, from Hildegard of Bingen, that vision of Adam. But the Adam that she saw, and maybe we will see, will not be the original outline, but the slowly filling in of flesh and blood through our experience. Flesh and blood in quite a different way. But the story is, at the end of time, we will all return back to Adam Kadmon, from that place from which we were originally emitted, to come down to serve the Holy One, to act as the nerve endings of the Holy One. This celestial or divine person is often spoken of by the mystics. In the, I think, 12th and 13th century, it was known as the Kavod, the glory of God. Next one. So here is the ladder of descent through the four worlds, and here are the various stages of ascent of self-realization, where that original I am comes all the way down here, and as Jesus said, split a stone and I am there. That same I. And these are simply different degrees of I am. Next one. And here we are on the earth, between the works of nature and the works of man, the mineral, vegetable and animal levels, the levels of the elements, and the moon and the solar system and the stars, the edge of physical reality, the angelic worlds, the archangelic worlds, and the divine world of the name of God there. And this is the Kabbalistic view, and our task here as Kabbalists is to help God, to aid God, behold God. We have the lights on. We've got about 4 minutes for questions. Or 40 years, as it normally takes.
It gives me very great pleasure to introduce Arthur Ellison to you, who's an old friend of mine and colleague. I was a relatively young neuropsychiatrist at St. Thomas. It's not quite loud enough. Could we have it a bit louder? I was then a comparatively young neurophysiologist, in fact, at St. Thomas's Hospital. And this strange man from electronic engineering, who was professor of electronics at City University, came to me and said he was interested in brain function and what happened during meditation. Now, I know perfectly well that engineers are not interested in that sort of thing. And so I was extremely interested in studying Arthur for a bit. And in fact, I found that I was quite wrong. And I think that this is because Arthur was originally born in Birmingham. He's a Brummeian. And Brummeians have a very down-to-earth view of life. And Arthur was asking some of the most fundamental questions. Of course, being a professor of electronic engineering, he was interested in science, but he has a much wider interest than that. And he's a much more integrated person than just having an interest in electronic engineering. He has an interest in the engineering of the universe. What's it all about? Why are we here? Etc. And he's enormously experienced. And when he was asking me questions about how the brain worked, it wasn't like that at all, because I was asking him questions about parapsychology, as he's been president of the Psychical Research Society. He also was one of the first people to get a course on parapsychology into City University. I mean, most amazing things. And he also is enormously experienced in particularly theosophy. And in his youth, he did a number of experiments in theosophy, but also coming out of that into parapsychology. And you can't really raise anything in parapsychology without Arthur having done an experiment. For example, you will say to him, "Yes, Arthur, what do you think of the aura?" he'll say, oh yes, we've done experiments on that. All you simply do is put a medium behind the screen, put their hand out of the person, say, can you see the aura? And the medium says, yes, yes, I can see it. So you take the hand away and you say, can you see the aura out there now? And the medium says, yes, yes, knowing the hand is there. So you take the hand away further and the medium can't see it. And you say to the medium, any aura? No, no aura. So tell me when it occurs. So he brings the hand right up to the edge and the medium can't see an aura. Because in fact, the aura is part of the gestalt. It doesn't exist independently of the perception of the person. And so, of course, auras don't come out before things, they come out with things. Lovely, simple demonstration. Arthur, it's a very great pleasure to have you here. And I look forward very much to your talk, the crucial importance for science of experience in psychical research. Sorry, I'll read that again. The crucial importance for science of experience in psychical research. And really, Arthur, more than anybody I know, has manifested this, the open inquiry inwards and the open inquiry outwards. So he's very much science of the spirit and the spirit of science. Arthur.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, or should I say friends, it's an enormous pleasure to be here again amongst so many old friends and quite a few new ones too. And it's also very challenging. When I look around the audience, I see at least 2 or 3 people or more who know a great deal more about everything I'm going to talk about than I do. So it's very challenging. In the last 20 or 30 years, I've learned a great deal about that fundamental of science, consciousness. At the moment, I'm learning faster than I ever have. This is the result of first-hand and practical psychical research, plus experiments with my own consciousness, plus experiments with the consciousness of others, based on my own experience. I shall try to communicate this to you as briefly as I can. To those of you who've heard me say the following introduction before, I beg your pardon. May I first define science? Science is the building of mental models representing and ordering our mental experiences and then endeavoring to test those models to destruction. When we manage to show that a model is inadequate to represent our experiences, then we have, as a result, new experiences, and we improve our model to include those. When we have a set of models which have useful predictive value and which have not yet been falsified, we go on using them. We all do that, orthodox and unorthodox scientists alike. Many people, not excluding many scientists, actually consider that science is the business of describing, modelling, in ever finer detail and in ever more useful ways, the real physical world all around us, rather than our mental experiences. So the basic problem to which I'd like now to draw your attention is the tendency of most normal scientists, and many others too, to confuse their models with reality, to confuse the map with the territory. I would perhaps pejoratively describe what they are doing as scientism. The latter is what Thomas Kuhn's so-called normal scientists do. They do not seem to realize that all they ever have or can have are mental experiences. Everything else, including this physical world that appears to be all around, everything else is a representational model. Normal scientists, in Kuhn's words, are puzzle solving within an unquestioned paradigm. A paradigm is, of course, what I've just called a model. The unquestioned paradigm is classical or monistic realism. I find it strange that even though quantum mechanics, as Dana said earlier, is showing quite clearly that what appears to be out there in physical space depends for its nature and validity on our consciousness of it, and also that it is perfectly clear that we cannot possibly get outside our own consciousness and have no way of proving with certainty that there is a world out there at all, that nevertheless most normal scientists, not quite all, have what appears to be a dogmatic faith equal in intensity to that of the most rabid and fundamental religious believer that there is. Widespread experiences that simply do not fit normal science are all considered illusory, even though they are sometimes veridical. But they do not know that if they never look at them with an open mind. If you want a good example of what I mean, listen to the new Oxford Professor for the Public Understanding of Science. Perhaps we should forgive the normal scientist, as nature seems to have programmed most of us to be rather naive realists. And the result is often a battle between them and those who consider that they can see a little bit further. I suppose it's true to say that all of us do not change our views, orthodox or otherwise, unless we have a real need to do so. Good evidence that our views are inadequate does not seem to be enough. There are plenty of examples all around of people just like ourselves, many of us having distinctly unorthodox views, who appear unable to change them when evidence is presented that they are clearly inadequate. Peter described an experiment I did many years ago on the author, showing it is not in physical space. That hasn't made the slightest difference. The people who describe it as though it is speak in just the same way. One understands that this is difficult when one's own profession is based on realism, as mine is as a power engineer, not an electronics engineer. The answer is, of course, the philosophical view called pragmatism. I'm a pragmatist. That means to me that the use of a representational model that has excellent predictive powers, that works very well in practice, is perfectly permissible, provided one realizes at the same time that there is nothing fundamental in it, that it is not a description of reality. It is just a mental model. We do not have anything else but mental models. Let's discuss for a moment classical realism so that we're clear what I mean. This is the philosophical view that we are surrounded by the physical world, spread about us in 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, and quite independent of ourselves. We ourselves are looked upon as our physical bodies, having a little computer at the top we call the brain. We make contact with the physical world via the 5 senses and in no other way. And our thoughts and feelings, including our highest aspirations, are just the epiphenomena of the brain. When the physical body is destroyed, we cease utterly to exist. That's realism. And our language is based on this realism, based on it. Whenever we discuss anything, we are using a language based on realism. The problem with normal science based on classical realism, then, is, as I have said, its utter inability to cope with large numbers of widely shared human experiences. The reason is that it does not include in its modelling relevant and highly important evidence. Before I leave this introduction and explain why psychical research experience is of such crucial importance to good science, I must illustrate, again, those of you who've heard me say this before will perhaps forgive me, I must illustrate the false use of the realism model which so many scientists make, and probably most of the rest of us most of the time, except those we are calling in this company the mystics. They are probably the mystics, in some cases at least, rather closer to reality than the rest of us. The mystics are trying to use a top-down approach to reality, whereas the scientists are trying to use a bottom-up approach. There are certainly dangers in both. I shall have a little more to say about the bottom-up approach of normal science later, especially the value for good science of studying types of consciousness at first hand. So the normal scientist explains an experience by actually describing it in terms of his model of reality. Any explanation of anything is just a description in terms of some mental model shared between two people. We all met this at school, and it is true of any explanation of anything. If you ask how you see an object out there, the realism model is used, and rays of light are, it is explained, striking the object of interest and then forming inverted images on the retinas. Rupert Sheldrake went over this last night. I shall draw rather different deductions from his at the end. Electrochemical pulses then travel to the appropriate centres in the computer we call the brain and reach the visual cortices. Within, it is explained, see. What sort of an explanation is that? How do we see? How is it that we seem to be looking out through those two little windows at the front of the computer at a world full of movement and colour and sound, and who or what is supposed to be looking anyway? The computer? There is nothing else in this model of realism, and I shall come back to it later. The major alternative philosophy to realism is idealism, the philosophy that there is nothing but ideas. Dr. Samuel Johnson, a realist, said that he refuted idealism thus and kicked a stone. Of course, that gets one absolutely nowhere. It merely results in another stream of electrochemical pulses travelling to another part of the little computer in the head. Similar suggestions are sometimes given to realists like me. I had this one about a week ago. It is suggested that if I really think that the world is nothing but ideas, then I should be willing to jump in front of the next big red bus I see. Of course, if I did that, then my level of consciousness would change to the next one up. Perhaps even more illusory. Sadly, I'm not yet advanced enough to carry out experiments like that with impunity. So I'm suggesting, and I know that this will be somewhat controversial, that there is no good and truly fundamental science without the excellent evidence from psychical research, or parapsychology as the Americans call it. There is only scientism. Now let's go on to quantum physics. I'm not a physicist, and I know the dangers of going outside one's area of expertise, but I just must mention a few matters which appear to many physicists, besides to me, certainly to Dana, to indicate strongly also that idealism is perhaps a more useful paradigm than realism. I would say that many of the leading physicists, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, and probably others, are, or were, idealists, even though they did not usually use this sort of philosophical language about themselves. The facts, both theoretical and practical, that make me say this are, of course, related to quantum mechanics. The facts of quantum mechanics are showing, and as I said, they are backed up by measurements, experiments, as well as by theory, that this world depends on our consciousness for its meaning, its reality. And as we shall see, consciousness is a singular with no plural. Consciousness is grounded in a world where there is no time and space, no objects, no physical bodies. It seems to be the world described by the mystics, in which all is one. It is a transcendent world, experienced by those at a human level of consciousness when they occasionally experience it as light and bliss. It is, as the Hindu sages called it, an arupa world, a world without bodies and forms, without space and time. Dana called it the 0 point, was it? Something like that.
Vacuum state.
Yes, there are lots of different words for this. So how is quantum mechanics showing this? I'm not a quantum mechanic, so I don't need to have to drag this into quantum mechanics. In these ways, here I shall be very brief, as it is impossible in the time available to give full explanations, even were I competent to do so. So I shall be hoping that the scientists will follow along with me and will agree, and those of you who are not scientists will get the general idea. That's all I hope to do. First, the so-called Wigner's friend paradox. This is regarding that Schrödinger's cat mind experiment where the box is opened and the cat, which is in an ambiguous half-dead and half-alive state, is observed and so made to be one or the other. Wigner wondered whether the wave function is collapsed and the cat's ambiguous dead or alive state resolved when the friend opens the box, or whether it is when he tells Wigner the cat's state. It is this, I think, that caused Schrödinger to say that consciousness is a singular with no plural. Machines, detectors, can be in limbo, but not humans. I shall a little later refer to our confused state as human beings, in which, partly as a result of our language, we think of ourselves as separate from everyone else, when actually we're all one. This bit of physics is confirming the experiences of the mystics. This is also part of the illusion of a realism philosophy and the physical world separate from ourselves. The I and my in our materialistic, dualistic language are sadly misleading. Consciousness chooses amongst an infinity of alternatives when it manifests the material world. And little of all this is clear to common sense. Robert Oppenheimer, another good physicist, said that good science is uncommon sense. And another one said that if you say you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't understand quantum mechanics. So, in quantum theory, the subject that chooses and collapses the wave function is a single, universal subject, not our personal, very illusory ego I. This is part of our present maya, our present illusion. In Alan Aspect's experiment relating to the two correlated photons moving rapidly in opposite directions, when the observation collapses the wave function of one of them, causing it to take a certain polarity, the wave function of the correlated photon, which could be at the other end of the galaxy, also collapses immediately, maintaining the correlation. A consciousness that can collapse the wave function at a great distance instantly must itself be non-local or transcendent, as the mystics say. Now, may I refer briefly to John Wheeler's delayed choice experiment. In this, a beam of light is split by a half-silvered mirror into two beams, taking different paths, with a detector at the end of each. Both detectors click and show the arrival of a photon, but only one detector at a time, signifying which route the photon took. If by using another half-silvered mirror, the two beams are arranged to interfere with each other, looking upon them as waves, and cancel each other out, or alternatively to be additive, with a detector for each, one of the detectors never detects any photons, as signifying cancellation due to interference. The other detects photons. This appears to show that the photons must have split and travelled both routes at the same time. The interesting part of this experiment involves deciding at the very last picosecond, 10⁻12 seconds, whether or not to insert the second half-silvered mirror. That is, whether or not to measure the wave aspect. This means that the photons have already travelled past the point of splitting if one thinks of them as classical objects. Even so, inserting the mirror always shows the wave aspect, and not inserting it shows the particle aspect. Was each photon moving in one path or two? The photons seem to respond to a delayed choice instantly and retroactively. A photon takes one path or both paths exactly in harmony with our choice. How does it know? Is the effect of our choice preceding its cause in time? Wheeler says that nature at the quantum level is not a machine that goes its inexorable way. Instead, what answer we get depends on the question put, the experiment we arrange, the registering device we choose. Again, Dana mentioned this earlier. We are inescapably involved in bringing about what appears to be happening. In other words, there is no manifest photon until we see it, and how we see it determines its attributes. Splitting the photon into two wave packets, one for each path, produces only packets of possibilities for the photon. There is no actuality in space-time, no decision-making at the first splitting mirror. The photon is not a classical particle, always manifest in space-time. John Wheeler's delayed choice experiment shows clearly the vital importance of conscious choice in the shaping of the physical world. In this experiment, non-locality is clearly demonstrated. Actions are, quote, transmitted without signals through space. In that experiment, we're surely forced to give up the idea that there is a fixed and independent material world, even when we're not observing it. We get what the observer wants to see. You'll have some more down-to-earth examples of this a little later. Ramachandran, the neurophysiologist, constructed a paradigm for those who think that consciousness is a brain state. Wilder Penfield, another neurophysiologist, was also puzzled by thoughts of performing brain surgery on himself. Where is the subject and where is the object if you are performing brain surgery on yourself? Brain states are incomplete because they leave out consciousness. What we're looking for is what is looking. We cannot sensibly refer to ourselves as separate from the environment. We'll refer later to the very illusory nature of this I, which is looking. Schrödinger again said, without being aware of it, and without being rigorously systematic about it, we exclude the subject of cognizance from the domain of nature that we endeavour to understand. That's very important. This subject of awareness is what is important. A measurement is incomplete, and that collapses the wave function of a quantum object when the immanent awareness is included. Consciousness without awareness does not collapse the wave function. Amit Goswami cogently points this out. I found Goswami's insights of great help in considering this part of our subject. He points out, for example, that an omnipresent God collapsing the wave function does not resolve the measurement paradox, because if God is always looking, when is the measurement complete? You have got to include us. And remember, that word us is singular. I should just mention the Epr Paradox before leaving this very brief bit of physics. Bohr resolved this one. Einstein, Podolsky and Rosen thought that one could measure one correlated object without affecting the distant one with which it is correlated. But the collapse is non-local, as I said earlier, just as the correlation is non-local. Reverting to the aspect experiment then for one moment, this shows non-locality, transcendence. If we try to suggest normal variables we don't know about, hidden variables, as Einstein hoped when he said God does not play dice, then Bell's theorem shows that this cannot help. The hidden variables would also have to have these non-local characteristics. Aspect and Bell surely show that simultaneously occurring events in our space-time can be related to a common cause in a non-local realm outside space-time. Either the psyche cannot be localized in space, or space is relative to the psyche. The great psychologist C.G. Jung also had an insight and suggested that it was probable that psyche and matter are two aspects of the same thing. He called that transcendent domain of consciousness wherein lies the common cause of synchronous events. You remember, he wrote a great deal about synchronicity in connection with quite other matters than physics. The collective unconscious, the eternal now, where all is one, the infinite source of all possibilities, as Maharishi called it. Now let's come on to psychical research. I must now describe some personal experiences, and as I said, personal experiences is what is convincing, not reading books. Some personal experiences in the psychical research area of science, and you will see how they have helped make me into a classical idealist, one who considers that there is nothing but mind. I seem to be backed up by the greatest of the physicists, as I said. I shall leave you to make up your own minds on what you think about all this. A good many years ago, I, and probably others too, suggested that the BBC bring a young Israeli called Geller to this country. The result of that was I learned a few things about the vital importance of belief in our experiences. One Saturday afternoon, I, with Arthur Koestler and Arthur C. Clarke, had been invited by Professor Hasted, the Birkbeck College Professor of Experimental Physics and colleague of Bohm, to observe some experiments arranged by Hasted and involving Geller. Before entering the laboratory, the following occurred. Arthur C. Clarke said to Geller, "Before we go in, see what you can do about this." He took from his key ring the Yale key to his London flat, put it flat on the back of Hasted's secretary's typewriter, and placed his finger on the round end. The key lay there perfectly flat, and all three of us watched it like hawks. Geller came up and gently stroked it while we talked. In about a minute, the key bent up and could be rocked to and fro by Clarke. It had not moved from under his finger, which was on it the whole time. And I assure you, and any stage magicians who might be present, that my description is absolutely complete. Nothing else occurred. I have missed nothing out because it seemed to be unimportant. Sometime later, Arthur Koestler, with Mrs. Koestler and I, travelled north to visit the home of children in whose presence strange things, I used to call them Geller-type phenomena, appeared to be occurring. I bought several heavy and very strong teaspoons on the way to the house. After we got to know the family, consisting of mother, father, and 3 children, I gave a spoon to each of the 2 older children, a little girl of 11 and a boy of 13. We watched them closely. The other child was much younger and not much involved. The older children each took their spoon between thumb and forefinger just below the bowl, keeping the other fingers well out of the way as their parents had instructed them. They gently rubbed the spoon between finger and thumb. I watched the girl and Koestler watched the boy. After about a minute, the girl's spoon appeared to become like plasticine, and the bowl collapsed over her finger, giving a sharp bend in the spoon. There is not the slightest doubt in my mind, nor was there in Koestler's, that the story I have given you is complete. When I asked her exactly what she was doing, she said that she was saying to herself, bend, bend, and that she knew it might bend because she'd seen Geller do it. What did I learn from all that? First, that I could not bend a spoon like that because I had studied what I'm calling scientism, and I knew it was impossible. The little girl had a different belief. I think the same applies to Geller. I do not think that a belief different from that of the rest of us works all the time, perhaps because it does not go deeply enough. Just as I cannot possibly say that Geller, when it does not work, does not help out with a little stage magicianship. But it genuinely happens sometimes, I am convinced. I could go on with other examples of how our beliefs sometimes appear to modify the so-called laws of the physical world, sometimes including making the sick well. Psychic, spiritual and normal healing is too big a subject to include now. I do sometimes think that perhaps the various models that healers use to explain what they do are sometimes very effective, and perhaps because they believe in them. This is a vast, unexplored area of study. Open-minded anthropologists must have many stories to tell. I don't think there are too many of them around. I remember one Western scientist suggesting that it is the physicists who were creating the new particles that they were continually discovering, quote. He suggested that in the earlier years these particles did not exist. I have thought for many years that perhaps this somewhat illusory physical world is not entirely, but to a great extent, as it appears to be, because of the conditioning we have all been subjected to by our parents and our teachers, in other words, by our culture. A baby, of course, does not realize that it is separate from the objects we see all around it. It gradually, as a result of our conditioning of it, builds up that mental model of a world surrounding it and independent of itself. That mental model is, of course, to a great extent shared by the other members of our culture. You might think of that world, if you wish, in which it participates, as a set of thought forms. And much detail is filled in later by a Western science-based education. I hope it's obvious to us all now that we cannot get outside our own skin, and all the information we think we have of that world out there comes via electrochemical pulses from the senses reaching various centers in the brain. I hope that big question marks are arising in your mind. Remember, I'm using our normal language. It's a complete mystery to normal Western science, as I said earlier, how we seem to be looking out through two little windows. I'm not going to postulate anything out there at all. I don't think that's necessary. In fact, it's unnecessary. Who or what, you remember, is doing the looking is a complete mystery too. And remember that the difficulty is made worse by the fact that amongst those illusory objects out there is our physical body. It's a vicious circle of self-deception, isn't it? You get absolutely nowhere along those lines. I've never come across a philosopher who appears to have realized this, that our own body is one of those illusory objects out there. Nearly all the discussions I have had with others, and I've had a good many in the network, on the philosophical status of the physical world, start on these rather shaky foundations of inputs to the body. So we have a mental model constructed in this general way in the mind, whatever that may mean. Some confirmatory evidence that the mind is like this is provided by hypnosis. A hypnotist can alter the physical world for a reasonably good subject by a post-hypnotic suggestion. This means that a subject in hypnotic trance can be told by the hypnotist that when they are back to normal consciousness, they will observe, for example, someone very bizarre enter the room with them and with any others who are already there. The hypnotist can then tell the subject that they're about to be brought out of the trance and will have no memory of the suggestion. They then bring them out until they are back to normal, back to complete normality. And to their great surprise, the subject will see this bizarre stranger enter. The unconscious mind will cause this entirely hallucinatory figure to behave in what seem to be appropriate ways. Eventually the figure may walk out or otherwise disappear, and all is normal again. Almost anything can be changed for a suitable subject. The conditioned mind, and remember we all have conditioned minds, we've been given thousands of suggestions by authority figures earlier on. The conditioned mind appears to produce the normal physical world according to its conditioning, and it tries to be consistent. All this occurs at the unconscious level. Something very like this can occur when everyone is in normal consciousness, or we should perhaps rather say their normal consciousness. We most certainly do not all observe the same things at the same time. What we observe depends to some degree, perhaps more importantly than we think, on our conditioning and on our personal belief structures, our model. Consider the following. Some years ago I gave a lecture in our university on various matters which were strange for almost all members of the audience, such things as hypnosis, LSD effects on consciousness, and a few parapsychological matters. Then I asked the audience to try an experiment with me. I asked several of them out to see whether we could levitate something. They sat around a small table, which happened to be near the lecture bench, and I put on it one of several decorated bowls of flowers which had been put along the front of the bench. I asked the subjects to concentrate and try to imagine the bowl of flowers rising in the air. I asked the rest of the audience to remain quiet and try to help with their imagination. I explained that many Hindus believe that God created the world using the very creative sound Om, and that I would have this sound emitted from speakers at the front in order to help. The audience and the subjects concentrated, and after a minute or so, the bowl of flowers hoisted itself unsteadily into the air. There was an almost primeval gasp from the audience, such as I have never in my life heard before. Then the bowl flopped back to the table, and I ended the lecture in a rather vague way. Immediately a crowd rushed forward to examine the bowl and the table, etc., but they were not able to find anything normal, such as rods or wires, to explain the levitation in terms of the normal realism model which we use to explain almost everything, as is usual in our culture. Before I explain how I actually did this, may I describe the reactions of two members of the audience which illustrates the point I would like to emphasize. One lady said that she had never seen anything like that before in her life. She described a greyish substance which she had seen lifting the bowl, and which was also around the table legs lifting the table. Standing at the edge of the crowd was one normal scientist, a professor of physics. He could barely tolerate the hallucinations of this, to him, very foolish lady. He said very firmly, "Well, I saw nothing," turned on his heel and left the room. The explanation, quote, is as follows. "I had inside the locked shallow drawer of the table an electromagnetic levitator. One of my research areas at the time was electromagnetically levitated high-speed trains. The Japanese are doing all this now because our government wouldn't give us the money to continue. This is 15 or 20 years ago. The electric leads to the levitator pass down one of the hollow steel legs of the small table into the floor, which passed to the next room, a laboratory, where my technician was awaiting my signal to apply the voltage to the levitator. I had stuck to the bottom of the bowl of flowers a disc of aluminium, painted black like the bowl, so that it looked like the normal bottom of the bowl. When current was passed through the levitator by the technician, currents were induced in the aluminium disc and produced the forces required to lift the bowl. The normal scientist had perhaps forgotten, if indeed he ever knew, that I was doing research into magnetic levitation. The levitator, when carrying current, produced a loud hum. So the mystical sound from the east was to cover up this hum. So you might say there was no mystery for me, because I had a model which explained, quote, the whole thing. I should say no one has ever seen, heard, touched, tasted or smelled an electromagnetic field, I should point out, but it is a very good mental model. Rupert mentioned it last night, did he? Faraday didn't like action at a distance, so he filled in the space with this metaphysical abstraction. So there was no mystery for the normal scientist at the back of the audience. He knew that such things were impossible. One of those ridiculous paranormal things taken so seriously by the professor of electrical engineering. That lady who saw the grey substance may well have been a spiritualist, and her unconscious mind produced the ectoplasm, which was in accordance with her model. Most of the rest of the audience expected to find strings or rods, such as stage magicians would have used, doing the levitating in accordance with their normal realism model of the world. They ended up very puzzled indeed, just as many normal scientists are by the facts of quantum mechanics. They're so puzzled they put it on a shelf and look the other way. So all these things go on a pending shelf in the mind because we all resist strenuously any evidence which appears to threaten our normal models of reality, which we find so useful and which explain so much. We have, as a result of cognitive dissonance, a defense reaction, as the psychologists would say. There are several other genuine paranormal facts which I want to mention to you briefly. These are the sheep-goat effect and the experimenter effect, well known to all psychical researchers and repeatedly observed in many laboratories so that there is no reasonable doubt about them. For example, it was found in telepathy experiments that subjects who thought that telepathy might indeed be possible got better scores in identical experiments with the same researcher than did subjects who thought it to be impossible. This was called the sheep-goat effect, the sheep being the believers and the goats the disbelievers, and was discovered and named and shown to be true by Dr. Gertrude Schmeidler at City College, New York. Also, it was discovered that when an experiment was carried out by a researcher who thought that telepathy was impossible, less likely to show ESP, poorer results were obtained than when the identical experiment was carried out with the same subjects by a researcher who thought it to be perfectly possible. This was called the experimenter effect. Everybody involved in any way in an experiment appears to have an influence, small or large, on the results. I mentioned earlier that we're all one, that consciousness is unitary. What matters is the gestalt, that German word meaning the whole. What is believed tends to come about. This is part of the reason why psychical research is orders of magnitude more difficult than any other more normal scientific subject. Everyone involved, together with their beliefs, appear to be relevant. If the Oxford Professor for the Understanding of Science were here at this moment, he would have walked out, I think. Perhaps I should say it is certainly not more difficult than quantum physics, with which it appears to share very similar problems. And those so-called problems are to do with our normal realism model being utterly inadequate. Let me go on straight away, briefly, to discuss those problems which it shares and which are the reason why I gave this talk the title it has. I suppose everyone who has studied the evidence for telepathy with an open mind is in little doubt that it sometimes genuinely occurs. There is so much of it, and it is of such a high quality, especially recently the Ganzfeld experiments in Edinburgh. The general scientific standards in psychical research laboratories, or parapsychology laboratories as the Americans call them, are much higher than in any other scientific laboratories that I know. They have to be because so many normal scientists try to shoot the results down. Successful telepathy experiments show results which are unaffected by distance. And also, they have to be statistically evaluated. It is not possible to tell whether any particular guess in a telepathy experiment is right or wrong. I call it guess because it is not consciously present. It is in that unconscious of which we're all aspects. But in the case of successful telepathy opponents able, with difficulty, to be retrieved. You remember the quantum physics experiments I listed, which also show non-locality and involve probabilities. So it looks as if successful telepathy pairs have a psychological correlation which has nothing to do with space, which is non-local, that is, which is in that region Jung called the collective unconscious, just like the correlated photons we looked at when we were considering quantum mechanics. There's also plenty of evidence that shows that precognition, impossible on a realism basis, also sometimes takes place. The best evidence I know has been obtained in John's laboratory in Princeton. John's remote perception experiments, besides being enormously successful, with odds against chance made as high as you like by just continuing longer, show a complete independence of both space and time. A subject in the laboratory in Princeton gets impressions of a distant site where an experimenter is situated, not only with far above chance success, but also with equal success if the target is randomly chosen by the computer at the time of the experiment, or various times before the experiment, or, very surprisingly, and perhaps indeed unbelievably to many, is randomly chosen after the subject has produced their impressions. In other words, these experiments show complete independence of time and space and have to be statistically related. You will remember evaluated, I should say. You will remember the other scientific experiments in physics, which also show these characteristics, just the same as good quantum physics. John writes that he finds what he calls quantum mechanical metaphor to be very helpful in thinking about and evaluating these experiments. Now I want to finish by talking briefly about experiments on our own consciousness. I have said several times that there is only one consciousness and that we all share it. The personal I is part of the Maya, the illusion in which we live our lives, most of the time anyhow. May I briefly just mention how we can know that for ourselves? I have already suggested that in the first stage of the argument, we cannot get outside our own skin. We have only these so-called inputs from the senses to tell us what is out there, and cannot possibly prove that there is anything out there at all. And our body has just the same status as any other object. I'm suggesting that there is nothing at all out there. That deals with the illusory physical world. Now for the illusory I, the self with a small s. If you meditate, turn within and watch your thoughts, you soon find that, at least for a very long time, there are thoughts related only to memories and elaborations of memories and feelings about memories of this physical world, which is an illusion, a maya. If you consider what you are, what makes the normal daily you are referring to when you use the personal pronoun, you soon realize that it is this collection of memories. Without your memories, especially perhaps your name, you are not a human being. So your ordinary daily I is a collection of memories of an illusion. Goswami explains, reverting to physics, that the self of our self-reference is the result of a tangled hierarchy, and our self-consciousness is that unitary consciousness we all share. I wish there were more time to go into that now, but there isn't. In the consciousness group of the network, some 30 or so of us are trying to learn lucid dreaming. That is, dreaming when you are well aware that you are dreaming and have a full normal memory. I mean, know your name, address, telephone number, etc., and that your physical body is asleep in bed. That's an absolutely delightful situation to be in. It's really living. I was in that state one night not long ago and made a few investigations of myself, or should I say of my body and of the world around. I was breathing just the same as usual. My heart was beating just as usual. The ground was just as hard and rough as usual. I could not really detect much difference from my ordinary daytime life, except that certain things seem to be possible that do not appear to be so when I'm normally awake. For example, I was able to levitate at will. There's so little difference I have to levitate in order to be sure that I'm lucidly dreaming. Perhaps if I had tried, I should have been able to bend spoons at will. Beliefs appear to become true rather more easily than is normally the case awake. Quote, I began to wonder during the following day whether the differences in the two worlds are due to certain rigidities of mind which appear to be characteristic of this physical world, and how many of these are of a cultural origin. We are certainly, all of us, heavily conditioned to normal reality, as we call it. I think that this intractable physical world is organized by nature to evolve us. We're supposed to take it very seriously indeed, and that is the reason why any evidence that appears to indicate otherwise is strongly resisted. This is just an idea, not a scientific statement. The world of lucid dreaming, the next world you might call it, is not a vague fantasy world then. It is just as solid as this one, except when you modify it by your consciousness, and you have to learn how to do that. But it seems easier to do than it is in the normal physical world. The beauty of lucid dreaming is this. In due course, you might learn to be conscious for 24 hours a day. And then you might discover that your normal conscious life is part of the dream too. The result of this might be a better chance of waking up from the dream, from the consensus trance, as Charlie Todd calls it, in which we all spend most of our lives. I asked earlier, if we'd been brought up in an Aborigine culture, should we too be able to do some of the things they do? Those children I mentioned earlier are now grown up and educated. They cannot bend spoons paranormally anymore because they now know that it is impossible. The laws of nature forbid it. I beg leave to doubt sometimes whether there are such things as laws of nature. But there may be tendencies or habits of nature, as Rupert calls them, going with our present state of consciousness. One scientist suggested, you remember, that the new particles that scientists discover are actually being created by them, by their combined thought power. They all think about it, extrapolate their theory, their model a bit further. Suddenly one of them, quote, discovers it, and then all the others do quickly soon after. This would be the fitting in of more detailed pieces of the puzzle referred to by Kuhn, maintaining the consistency of the physical world, just as shown in hypnosis. What a lot of research we have waiting to be done when there are more open-minded scientists who've taught themselves by certain disciplines to have lucid dreams, out-of-the-body experiences and so on, and who accept what seem to me to be the clear implications of quantum physics. It's an exciting prospect. And in Thomas Kuhn's language again, it's likely sometime to lead to a paradigm shift. Everyone then realizing that what appears to be out there depends on themselves to a very great degree. I have also been doing experiments using both myself and a number of volunteers on another Maya state, the out-of-body experience. This is an experience just like an early stage of the near-death experience in which one can see one's physical body lying on a bed, but one has full consciousness in what is apparently another body. The near-death subjects perceive what seems to them to be the normal physical world, and according to the researches of Michael Sabon, they perceive it accurately. Do they really? I've been setting up in my study for a year and a half a 3-digit random number and asking volunteer out-of-body subjects to try to come there in their other body and read it, later telling me what it is. One lady I had never met and who had never been to our house projected from Ireland. In the first 4 experiments, she got 2 of the 3 digits right each time. That has odds against chance of about 2,000 to 1. Very, very highly significant. Statistics again. Why she cannot get the 3rd digit I have not yet discovered. I'm trying. Several other subjects have occasionally got 2 out of 3 right, but they rarely get all 3. This experiment does not eliminate telepathy from me. That comes at a later stage. A 3rd stage will involve no one ever normally knowing the numbers, which will be only on the computer screen. That is what we call in psychical research a pure clairvoyance experiment. Time precludes my describing this further. It is current ongoing work. However, I'm beginning to wonder whether an out-of-body experience and a lucid dreaming experience are actually the same thing at different stages. They occur as a result of prior belief and expectation. Distant viewing may also be much the same. I shall be describing all this at greater length, with, I hope, some later conclusions in a forthcoming book. We all advertise our books, don't we, here?
Yes, we do. And it's coming up to 1 o'clock.
This research on consciousness that is teaching me more and faster than ever before. 1 minute. May I most strongly recommend to those of you willing to expend a considerable effort on yourself that you start the first-hand exploration of consciousness. You will learn more than any amount of theoretical discussion will teach you. Finally, on consciousness, Amit Goswami says that concepts such as non-local and unitive consciousness and the idea of non-local collapse make the universe less comprehensible to the material scientist and a lot more meaningful to everyone else. And that certainly includes this psychical researcher, and indeed, I think, perhaps most of us here. And finally, so much more of relevance and importance that I have no time for. There is excellent evidence that the brain-mind is a quantum system stroke measuring apparatus, collapsing wave functions from the unconscious and recording them. In meditation, there is coherence between different parts of the brain. Peter knows Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum, and I understand others independently have demonstrated that two subjects feeling a non-local correlation show quantum non-local correlation between brain states even when they are both in electromagnetically screened rooms measured by EEG. It is clear to me at least that our imagination is the most powerful force in our quantum universe, so far as we are concerned. Our mental models both facilitate certain things for us, but also limit us in many ways. With better mental models, and that is what I am suggesting, who knows what might be possible for us? One day we shall know the truth, the capital T, and then we shall lift right out of the worlds of illusion and find reality, the capital R. But at our present unevolved state, an occasional brief experience of this is an experience of merely woolly bliss and complete unity, barely full consciousness. May I wish us all bon voyage in our evolutionary journey through the worlds of illusion and mental models, ultimately to find reality.